Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns, and we have a first-time guest. Although I will say that this lady and her staff have been just after us for months and months, and we couldn't hit the right scheduling date, but I am so happy. We're going to hear a story today of leaving Arkansas, really, and a trailer park background, very humble background, on the way to the new Congress. And Angie Craig, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Thank you so much for having me.
It is really our pleasure. And why don't you give us a little bit of that background? Because I know that not only the humble trailer park beginning, but you worked your way through college. You had a mother who not only raised children, but got herself a degree and insisted on college for futures.
Well, a lot of politicians will come in here and they'll talk to your viewers about the American dream. I've been lucky enough to live it. As you talk about my background, certainly I grew up in a trailer park. My mom had 3 young kids when my father left. He moved to Georgia for a period of time. And my example growing up, Alan, was of a mother who was absolutely determined to make a better life for herself and her 3 kids. And I have to tell you, part of the story that I don't talk about a lot is that my grandmother also played just a critical role in our family after my father left. And you're right, I observed my mom. She worked many jobs. She went to college, junior college, community college, until at age 29 she finally got that college degree and became a teacher. I don't know how she got through to all 3 of us in the way that she did, but we knew growing up that we too would go to college. And it didn't matter that I had to work 2 jobs. It didn't matter that I had to take out some student loans. We just knew we were going to do that no matter what it took.
Yeah, neither of my parents went to college, but it was a given that I was going to go to college.
That's right.
And yes, I also worked in college and in law school, both. But maybe you appreciate where you get to a little bit more than, say, if you have the silver spoon in your mouth.
Yeah, and I do think it plays a large role. For me, I know we have 2 kids in college now, But I think about, as we have gone through the last couple of years of deciding, of them deciding where they're going to go, and me seeing the cost of a college education today. We're talking about state schools my kids are going to, just the cost of a state college education today. And it really has caused me to think about, would I be sitting here across from you today running for Congress if I were coming out of that same trailer park 25 years later? And I believe the answer is no.
Now, you mentioned politicians and that you are a politician. I beg to differ. And I think that's what makes your candidacy really unique, is that you are not a politician. I hope you never become a politician.
No.
I hope you always maintain the personality, the drive, and we haven't even talked about where you got to the top of a corporate ladder before you decided to give it up and give this a shot.
Well, I hope that I always keep the attitude that I'm a public servant. And I certainly was on the leadership team at St. Jude Medical for about 10 years. I led areas like health policy and corporate communications. And the last 4 years of my career there, I was head of global HR. So I had 16,000 employees across the world. And I know how lucky I've been, absolutely. But what that has done my whole life in total has really makes me want to ensure that every family in this country has a path to opportunity. And I believe that our federal leaders in Washington as public servants should play a role in making sure that every family, if they're willing to work hard, has access to that opportunity, Alan.
And college affordability is so important. I remember I was accepted to Syracuse, and the tuition was $275 a semester.
Right.
They raised it to $300, and I immediately had to check and see, can we manage that?
Right.
Now, of course, this is back in the days of Abraham Lincoln. Well, maybe a couple of years after, but it is a consideration. So college affordability, I know, is important in terms of you and the platform you want to really engage in.
High quality public education and college affordability is really important to me, and that's based on, my mother's experience and the fact that I do believe it's so much more difficult for kids today to be able to afford that college degree without coming out of college with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 or more in student loan debt. So I've made this a big part of my platform, and it extends beyond just college affordability. I've met so many young people around the district, people like Renee Ripberger, who graduated from Burnsville High School, who are coming out with the average Minnesota debt, about $31,000. And it's on that when the third bill arrived, she decided right then and there that she wasn't going to be able to purchase that first home anytime soon. So I come at this a little bit from the perspective of what other places of growth in our economy is the $1.2 trillion in student debt that our kids are faced with costing us as Americans. And I have a lot of policy ideas here. Some have been talked about by other leaders, but maybe some are new ones. I bring a particular focus on public-private partnerships. So what if we could develop...
Which is what we have right here in this studio with ETV, the City of Eagan, and Thomson Reuters, that makes this possible and has made it possible for us.
That's such a good example. It really is. And what if we could have a tax deduction for companies who are willing to chip in as an employee benefit to pay down student debt? It would be a wonderful employee benefit. I think we've got to look at the interest rates we're charging our young people for an education in this country. The business I worked for didn't pay 5% in interest, which is what we're charging undergrads.
It happens to be obscene, as well as the fact that if they get into trouble, they can't discharge that in bankruptcy.
That's right. That's right.
Corporation, no problem.
I can
Walk away
refinance
from
my
it.
house. I can refinance my car. Why are we making it so difficult for students to refinance their student loans? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Because there is a mentality out there far to the right of you that really is not interested in education, is really not interested in anything but perpetuating themselves in office and building up these huge war chests of money that they get from lobbyists and the like. And that's why this country is in trouble in some respects.
It's fascinating, though, Alan, because I think there's a case to be made. And I want to be clear. The voters of the 2nd Congressional District have a very clear choice in this race. I'm someone who's going to be looking for common sense solutions, looking for common ground. If you reframe the discussion to a Republican colleague who's focused on Minnesota families, the way you have it is this: do you understand the economic development that this student loan debt is costing our nation? Do you understand? And they're for economic development, right? Do you understand that workforce development is a very, very critical need from a business community point of view? So we can work on these issues together if we think about them in the context of what's right for Minnesota families.
And what's right for just voters in general. But, you know, we want everybody to vote, especially in this election. It's really important that we get out the vote. Minnesota, until the last election, has always led the nation in voter percentage. We fell to number 2. That's unacceptable to me.
Well, I'm working with our party as well as independently to make sure we get voters out on Election Day here in 2016. In fact, today is the first day of early voting in Minnesota, and I'm going to be working very diligently after this to try to turn out that vote. But coming back to your point, Republicans they understand the need for workforce development. This is something that I've been talking about a lot throughout the congressional district, is we need to make sure that students understand there is some alternative to college, because college isn't right for every single student. And when it's not, we need to make sure that the jobs that we're creating in our regional economies are the jobs that they're actually trained to do. In fact, I was at Dakota County Technical College recently, where we talked about just those programs. And in my work at St. Jude, which is fantastic to be bringing this experience into the race and ultimately into my role as a member of Congress, I worked with 4-year institutions. I worked with technical college, with 2-year colleges, to make sure that we're training young people and people who are trying to make a better life for their families, for the jobs and the careers that exist in our communities.
And it is so important. So let's talk about several other things.
Sure.
Social Security certainly is something that should be talked about. Health care, something to be talked about. The price of prescription medications, and if you don't believe me, just look at the EpiPen hearings that are going on in Congress right now.
Yeah, these are important issues. I just completed last week a Serving 2nd District Seniors Tour, where I traveled the district speaking to seniors about their concerns. And let me be clear, I will work to protect Social Security and to strengthen Medicare. This is one area of this race where my opponent and I are so polar opposites in the way that we think about it. Social Security, the trust fund, it runs out in 19 years. We can't wait until it's about to run out to start thinking about this. In 1983, Ronald Reagan worked with Tip O'Neill. What did they do? They formed a bipartisan group of lawmakers who came up with solutions so that we can treat seniors with the dignity and respect they deserve.
And that's almost gone from the picture today. We have such really vehement partisanship that's why this Congress has gotten nothing really done in this last, I would say several years.
You mentioned Mylan and the EpiPen, and certainly Senator Klobuchar has been such a leader on this issue, and I'll be proud to follow her on the House side on these issues. But this issue is so much broader than just EpiPen or Mylan. The idea that we are not allowing the U.S. government to negotiate for Part D Medicare pricing for pharmaceutical drugs is egregious. We have the purchasing power.
I think it's criminal. I
It
really
is.
do.
It's egregious. We have the power to negotiate, and we're not doing it based on the fact that lobbyists are telling lawmakers not to do that. And so when I'm a member of Congress, I'm going to work to strengthen Medicare. I'm going to actively work so that the government has to negotiate its pricing. And let's return some of those dollars. You know, my colleagues on the other side, they want to pay down the national deficit. Well, we should be able to get every single penny out of these drug makers. Let's return part of that in the form of lower prescription drug pricing
And what
in
about
this
these
nation.
companies that are going overseas, moving their headquarters overseas
Right.
to avoid paying U.S. taxes?
Yeah.
This, to me, is extremely troublesome.
Yeah. Well, there's so many issues, Alan, that I feel so strongly about, and we've got to make sure that American companies are certainly paying their fair share of U.S. taxes. And at the end of the day, we've got to focus on jobs. I want to see us focused on how can we create jobs. The private sector certainly creates a lot of those jobs, but America hasn't invested in itself in decades. We've got roads and bridges and
I was
dams.
just going to bring up infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
And, you know, I think back to what was done with the CCC and Roosevelt and
Right.
even Eisenhower,
Yeah.
who created the National
Yeah.
Highway System.
Sure.
And
Well,
we just
think
ignore
about this
that.
for a minute, though. The idea, the repatriation topic that you referenced a minute ago, there's $2 trillion overseas. What if we found a common sense, common ground where those dollars could come back, but only if companies could invest it in building new buildings, in new manufacturing, in R&D? And what if the tax we collected from that $2 trillion, so that companies couldn't invert any longer or invest overseas, was used for a capital infrastructure program for America? In my mind, we've got to start thinking about these things. They're not disconnected. They are all related to each other.
And another thing which the other side of the aisle ignores is climate change. Now, all you had to do was look at television within the last several days and see cars floating right here in Minnesota in 7 to 12-inch rains. Climate has changed. There is global warming. Nobody can, in good faith, can ignore it. We have to attack it.
I'm running against one of the biggest climate change deniers running for Congress or serving in Congress. And so that's exactly who I'm running against.
And who recently moved back from North Carolina only for this run.
Well, I keep
more consistent with
sure.
North Carolina politics.
Well, look, my opponent's been stoking partisan divisions in Minnesota and North Carolina and across this country for decades. That, to me, that is part of the reason we're facing the kind of government gridlock we're facing today. My opponent says he wants to join the Freedom Caucus. That's exactly the element of the Republican Party that's not allowing us to get things done in Washington
Don't you love the
anymore.
names they come up with for these right-wing organizations? The Freedom Caucus, which will take away a lot of your freedoms. Even the approach to a new constitutional convention to change what obviously has worked in this country and brought this country to the pinnacle that it was. Not necessarily that it is, but it can be again.
Yeah. Well, I sort of chuckled at myself when you talk about Jason moving back from North Carolina, because as you know, Jason's ballot on Election Day is going to be a choice between Betty McCollum and someone else, because he doesn't live in the 2nd Congressional
That's
District.
yet another ludicrous aspect of all
I
of this.
laugh
yes.
every time I think about that. Jason Lewis can't even vote for Jason Lewis.
Well, I hope to see some commercials in that regard between now and the weeks that are left, because I don't think the people realize that. Another thing, and actually we blew through the time so quickly here, but another thing is veterans. Yeah. Veterans who put their life on the line and sometimes lose their life and yet come back and don't get the type of treatment through the Veterans Administration that we owe it to them.
Well, we've got to make sure we're supporting both our active duty and our veterans, our returning veterans. And this is something that I feel very, very strongly about. In fact, at St. Jude Medical, I developed a program at St. Jude to figure out how can we transfer those leadership skills that they have developed through serving in the U.S. military and bring that into a private sector experience, because at the end of the day, America needs to be here, both in terms of helping them find jobs, helping them integrate, and their families integrate back into the U.S., and making sure that we're meeting their healthcare needs.
Especially their mental health care needs.
It's such a challenge, isn't it, Alan, to make sure that we're meeting their mental health needs.
And every day we see different tragedies that are broadcast, that are in the papers, which people don't read anymore, unfortunately. We have got to overcome this narcissistic feeling that people have and recognize that we have to share and we have to benefit everybody, because when we do that, we all are better people for it.
Well, I just held a roundtable, a panel discussion today that's somewhat related to many of the issues the veterans community is seeing, and that's the idea that chronic pain is really driving the opioid and heroin addiction challenges that we're seeing. Over 18,000 people in 2014 died of a drug overdose. In Minnesota, that's risen 16-fold over the last 15 years. And 50 people died in the 2nd Congressional District in 2015. 28 of them were opioid and heroin addiction. And this is one of those issues that I've committed myself to, because we see our veterans too falling under this trap when we don't give them the meet their needs. And Alan, this is really personal to me. I have an adopted son who's 18 years old now, and we adopted him in an open adoption, whereby at some point in his life, if he wanted to meet his birth mother, we would facilitate that. And when Josh asked to meet his birth mother, we found out that she too had fallen victim to prescription drug death.
Which makes him more vulnerable.
And Josh is just this amazing kid. He wants me to do this work in Congress, and he wants me to help him make a difference and make sure that other people's birth moms or mothers don't fall victim.
And we've been talking with Angie Craig, and we've run out of time. She's running for Congress, the 2nd Congressional District. See her ads and follow her program and her policies. Angie, thank you so much.
Alan, thank you.